Joined by Bryan Hayes. Hayes' social media was on fire Saturday night after Arber Xhekaj jumped Cedric Pare for his knee on Patrick Laine. Xhekaj got fined $3,300 for pounding a guy who clearly did not want to go. We did the math. That's kind of like a $260 fine for someone who makes $100,000 a year. Not much more than a parking ticket. Hayes, is the NHL too soft on violent acts like this?
I think they got this one wrong. Yes, I do. I think this checked off every possible box, Gino, for me, for this to be a suspension into the regular season. Probably only a game, but like you mentioned, the fining system is a complete waste of time. I don't buy it, this idea that you're on the books now. They control the books, right? George Peros in the league, it's all arbitrary. It's all subjective. They determine what the books actually are. But those boxes that got checked for me, was it retribution? Absolutely. Like you mentioned, this was in response to Pare on Laine. Was it violent? Absolutely. Xhekaj was chasing him around and throwing bombs, and they got lucky. He threw a bomb at Pare that just missed, that had shades of Bertuzzi Moore from behind coming up ice, and he threw a hook and it just missed him. And the third box that it checked for me is, at any point, was the other player defenseless? And that was the case with Pare. So it was a retribution play, it was a violent play, and Pare was defenseless at times. So for me, it absolutely is a missed opportunity for the league to go at this kind of stuff. And they've gone at it before in other ways. The Morgan Riley and Ridley Gregg situation was very similar in terms of the check boxes, and he got 3 games. I understand different context, different weapon of choice, so to speak, but very similar in terms of the boxes that I keep talking about here. So a fine to me is ridiculous. It's a complete waste of time. If I were running the league, if I was George Peros, Xhekaj would have missed at least opening night.
All right, beyond this individual incident, what about the big picture? A fight isn't a fight unless two guys both want to go. Without it, how's that anything less than assault? The league is very strict, Hazer, when it comes to headshots. But this is allowed. Do you see a disconnect here?
Yeah, I do see a disconnect in terms of the overall, essence of what happened here and the end result. Once we saw at the end that Pare actually wasn't going to really try to defend himself. But I think that's probably where the league does push back here. And I used the Ridley, Gregg, Morgan Riley comparison. And what was different between that one and this one is that Gregg had no opportunity at defense. Morgan Riley went right at him, cross-checked him in the head. Ridley Gregg didn't see it coming, didn't know that it was going to happen, couldn't defend himself. The issue here was that Pare technically could have. And I would guess that that's why the league decided just to fine him as opposed to suspend him. And that's where I would differentiate on this, Gino. That's why I would give Xhekaj 1 game as opposed to the 3 that Riley got, because Pare could have turned around and defended himself. And I know that people hate to hear that, and there's a lot of people on the outside of the game that look at it and say that shouldn't matter. And maybe in some ways it shouldn't. But the players generally speak to this when they talk about policing the game, so to speak, is one-on-one, let me face it, let me see it. And I think the league probably looked at Cedric Pare and said, if you turned around, dropped your gloves, or didn't drop your gloves, and just seatbelted and held on, it maybe wouldn't have escalated to the point that it went to. So I think that's the example that the league would give, and it's one that I can actually understand. Pare did have the opportunity to turn around and protect himself at some point. He chose not to do that.
Pare said he was surprised when Xhekaj came after him. He didn't see him coming. But given the code, we all knew what was coming. The league knew exactly why it happened. Since players still see the code as a thing, is this yet another missed opportunity by the league to say, if you want to honor the code, it's going to cost you?
Yeah, I think that's really what it boils down to. I think there's been a lot of irrelevant points that have been made leading up to the aftermath, and that's, the fact that Pare did knee Laine, the fact that Pare's not an NHLer, the fact that Laine could be out long term, and if you take Xhekaj out too, that could be unfair to the Montreal Canadiens, all that kind of stuff. Even the idea that Pare had an opportunity to defend himself and ultimately really chose not to. I think in the end, that needs to be irrelevant if you're the commissioner of the league. And this might come out of the hands of George Peros. This is where it's on the commissioner and the owners, where if you get violent retribution in your league, that's when it can really break loose on you. That's when you can really get bad scenes. That, again, the most extreme example in recent history is Bertuzzi and Moore. And obviously, that was a black eye in the league, and it's one that they're really still recovering from to up to this day because it gets referenced as often as it does. This seems pretty clear and cut. Everything else, push it away. Like I said, Gino, off the top, the boxes. Was it retribution? Was it violent? Was the other guy defenseless? If that happens, I think the league needs to attack that. I think they need to stop that kind of stuff. I think they need to throw the book at guys that blow right through those stop signs, because fighting one-on-one, that's one thing, right? Mano a mano, drop the gloves, I see it coming, that's one thing. It's a violent sport. It's a physical sport. You can't run out of bounds. Crazy things are going to happen. But this is one that's extreme, and it's one that I think the league needs to attack more. I think they had an opportunity to really put their stake in the ground and say, we're not going to accept this. And they chose not to do that. And again, a fine, there isn't a player in the league that's looking at that fine and even flinching if this opportunity comes up again.
Yeah, Leafs and Habs have faced each other twice in this preseason. Next up, they'll open up the regular season against each other a week from this Wednesday. We'll see if the bad blood continues.